So just on the rear output shaft, you've got a gear driver, which doesn't have a gear drive, speedo driver, sorry, which doesn't have a speedo on the GU Series 8. I don't know about the others. So that just slides off. So to prevent, it's got a washer or a slinger, I presume it is. So I'll just take that off and I'll bag that. So it's got a washer on the front and washer on the back, and if you remember which way to stick it, the gearing itself is closest to the transfer. So again, the front is just silicon non to the back. I'll just spin it round. Okay, so you can see this lay bearing obviously just sits in the case. It's not a tight fit. So realistically, the front cover should just come off. Okay. So before I take it off, you've got to unclip the rear selector, so the shaft can come out in one go. Okay, so this is the rear of the transfer case, and this is the 2-4, so 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive shift rod. On the back there's a snap ring that has to be removed, so we'll give that a go. Tempt fate. Obviously there's a snap ring, a retainer and a spring. Obviously the retainer sits on the spring, not in the spring. Okay, so with that 2-4 snap ring removed, you can now pull back the center case. Inside you'll find the selector. Just hang on to that because it will go loose. And I'm pretty sure that probably the front selector, the 2-4 selector, will fall off. Right, and there we have it. So there's our center case, our selector, our lay shaft. I'll try and rest that down somewhere. I wish someone else had made a video to show me. Here's your rear section over here. That obviously shift fork is staying in, or will actually come off. If I put that out of the way, I don't need that section. So that's just going to be a trick lining up that back onto the selector shaft. So I'm just going to keep that where it is. I didn't cable tie that on. Right, so I've just laid out the rear part of the case, the centre part of the case, and these are the parts that you get in the Marks adapter. So you get a new lay shaft, so that lay shaft goes into there. It's got a bearing on the front and the rear. You get a new input shaft, I suppose, in gear. That goes in last. The difference in that is that in the Marks kit you get once you push the bearing on, you get a spacer, which you then put the circlip over the front, so the bearing will sit into there. Also in the kit you get a Welsh plug, and the Welsh plug will go into there, and when we get to that, there's a bit of Loctite, and then push that in. Don't lose it. And then you get your new reduction gear, or low range gear, and that's the gear that sits over in this section. In your kit you get a backlash gear, You've got to read the instructions. If your transfer case doesn't have it, they had them in the earlier ones, early GUs, GQs, and I think the later GUs didn't have it at all. So if you don't have one, you don't install it. If you've got one, you install it. If you've got two, you install them. Okay, I'm just going to quickly go over the bearings. I'm going to replace or put new bearings on. Although I've just pressed one bearing off. There's nothing wrong with the bearings, but I just thought it was going to be easy to put new ones on. So for the lay shaft where it goes into the centre case, the original bearing, if you're trying to find a part number, they're an end-to-end bearing, and I don't think that's going to show on the camera, but I'll just read it out. It's a 6207 X61CM 25PX46. Now if you buy a bearing replacement kit for the transfer off Marks, they say to use TM207. This is a NSK, not an NTN. So the NSK has got a snap ring which you can remove, which I'll remove, and it's got a seal, both sides, just a rubber seal. So as the original bearing doesn't have seals, I'll just pull those seals off. It's obviously not needed. Now that sits into, this end sits into, when I get the camera around, sits into the centre case. Now in the centre case there's also a shim in there. Now if you read your actual Nissan manual, it'll tell you what the shim and the preload and the amount of play, which I think is basically nothing off the top of my head. So that'll go on that end of the lay shaft. Now the other bearing on the front end, again it's an end-to-end bearing. I'm not going to get into battles over which bearings are best. And again, I don't know if that'll show up. It's an NTN 6208C3, and again I'm using an NSK bearing, and the NSK is a 6208, so it's the same. C3 I believe is the clearance, the radius there. That's the same bearing. Now to buy the 3 bearings for the input and the lay shaft, it cost me $101 or $102, something like that, which is a lot cheaper than paying $600 for the whole kit. I don't need the whole kit. I've only got 100,000 in this car. Okay, and just so I don't forget, so this is the front input shaft. This is the bearing. The original bearing's an NTN. Again, I don't know if that'll show. So it's an NTN 6212 X50 or 0 NC3. This again, C3 is the clearance, and that's got a snap ring, and the replacement bearing I'll be using on that again is a NSK, and I'm going to forgive me, my camera's upside down. So it's an NSK 6212 ZNR C3, again clearance, and NSK is the brand. And you see the replacements, it's actually shielded one side. Again, you can take the shield out. Okay, we'll just now compare the instructions on page 2. They come with the kit in relation to the case and the points that may need to be ground, if that's the case. So on the top of page 2, we've got this top part where the oil gutter comes through to the centre case. Now this is the centre case here, and this is the oil gutter. Now that's the original gear. I'll put the new gear on. The new gear obviously is bigger, it gives you the reduction. So that's the section there in that picture, is that section there. The bottom picture over here where it shows the oil gutter is in the actual front part of the case. So I'll just spin that round. So that picture there, because the input bearing's out at the moment and the lay bearing's out, so that picture there is that section here. So obviously when the two parts of the case come together, that forms one part of the gutter. Okay, on the top of page 6 there's another picture of a gutter. Now that picture is actually the same picture as on the bottom of page 2. So it just shows you what the grinding point is. So if the input shaft was in here and the selector was in, that's that image there. Page 5. So this top picture here talks about the another grinding point that you may have to check. Now that is again in the front part of the case, and that's this section over here, and there's a hump there which is that bolt which runs through, and that's the lay section. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at the centre bearing case, which is this one here. Let's move the camera up. We're going to start take off this old low range gear. We're going to put the new low range gear. We're going to check for this clearance. Okay, so there's your original low gear. There's no other shims on it. So put that aside. Okay, there's some roller bearings as well. We'll move those. And we'll check the clearance first. I'll just clean up the new gear and then we'll see what the clearance looks like. Okay, so just clean the protective coating off the new low range gear, and we'll just put it over that shaft. Okay, as you can see in there, and I'll just zoom in a second, probably need to take off, probably about 3mm. Yeah, 3mm, just to clear. Okay, so just I've taped up all this surface. I don't expect too much. Covered up all the holes. Covered up the back because the back covers off. Got a carbide burr. Just a bit of aluminium just to stop it from going up, just on the burr there. And I've marked out my lines. So I just want to give it a test fit to see what the clearance is. so I just need to go a bit more down to the line I marked. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to keep grinding that away off camera until it fits. Okay, so I've finished the last of the grinding for the low gear. It is quite terrifying really. You come very close to that channel that I presume you don't want to break through. You should join up with the other channel to keep the oil through in the oil gutter. There's a in the back, obviously in the casting it comes around quite a bit as a radius, so you've really got to square that off because the gear is what appears to be wider. Well, it's not wider, just because of the radius. So you go in a fair way, but apart from the tape you can hear just rubbing, that's cleared. I don't know if that can, what's the best angle, so you can see there you've got a gap, and the gap's probably, without me measuring it, it's probably about 1.5 to probably close to 1.5 through, so I think that's sufficient. I mean, obviously you don't want the gear wobbling around. So that's fitted, so now we go to the front part of the casing and do exactly the same procedure. Hopefully that's going to be a bit simpler because it doesn't have a radius. So I'll grind down 30mm depth. Obviously it's going to be the same angle as the front because it's going to match up to the centre part of the case. So I'll prep that and I'll just grind it. Grinding's grinding, so I won't bother doing that on camera. Okay, so I finished grinding the front part of the case, and I've got the case just sitting on there, just taking the selectors out. So there's the clearance in there, and it's a lot easier doing the front because you've got a lot more aluminium to play with, and it's not as bad. So that's the clearance. So now what I'm going to do is clean up the case, take off all the silicone, and give it a good clean. And then I'm ready to start putting it all, well, then I'm ready to do the selector clearance. But I'll clean it off first. Okay, one thing to note in the instructions, which doesn't make sense when I read them to start with, is that when I dismantle the transfer case, that's the lay shaft, that's the front gear, the front bearing, the rear bearing, so it goes into the centre case there, and that's the gear that drives the low range gear. Now when that comes out, it all comes out in one piece. I did press the bearing off, but it's off again. So it makes sense that when you put it together you push both bearings on and reinstall it the way I pulled it out. However, the instructions say elsewhere. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, the instructions say you fit the rear lay shaft bearing into the case before you fit the low gear. As suspected, it's because the low range gear is larger in diameter now, and that you won't be able to fit the bearing through. So what we'll do is, before I move on to grinding the front, I might as well rebuild this section here. The clearances are all done. I'm going to put the back lay shaft bearing in, and then reassemble the front section. Okay, so we've already got our original shim in. I haven't re-measured the shim. It's all been cleaned in here. I'll check that. Just get a soft dead blow hammer. Okay, so our bearings in. do a needle roller bearing back on. Get some transmission fluid just to oil the bearings. So for this has got auto front hub, so this runs automatic transmission fluid. There's two, you can use Transmax, is fine. Fit our new gear. And just on the circlip, if that picks it up, you'll see that it goes on an angle, the circlip. So obviously it'll go that way, so you can get the circlips on when it's on. So the undercut will go into whatever you're fitting.